These are a series of videos that the English department have made. Now, they are not a comprehensive line-by-line exploration of every poem. What they do is they give you some things that you might focus on if this was your named poem in the 20 minutes that you have to write about that named poem, or it might give you some suggestions for how to link with other poems and key quotes that you could perhaps look at and explore in the examination. Please remember that the part A poem will be printed for you and you will have 20 minutes to respond to that. You must focus on the question, you must find the focus. So look at the question stem and highlight where your focus is. And then read the poem, make 3 key points, three things that you are going to argue, and then go through the poem and highlight any quotation that will help you do that. We're trying to focus on AO2, which is your exploration of language, structure and form, and we're going to start with the poem London by William Blake. So we're going to give you a little bit of context, to remind you that you need to write about context in your response. Blake was born in London in 1757, and he didn't have a formal education, but as a child, the Bible was very, very influential to him and influenced his work in later life. Some of his contemporaries believed him to be mad. He did have visions. He was a poet, he was an artist, and some of his contemporaries, as I say, considered him to be unhinged. He wasn't successful in his lifetime and he actually died penniless, but he was a real forward thinker. He believed in sexual equality, racial equality, and he resented the corrupt, the exploiting upper classes and the Church of England. So in that sense, his poems are very anti-authoritarian. He kicks against authority. His poetry contains strong visual imagery, and they concern themselves, and I love this phrase, and it's so true of Blake, with the human condition, what it's like to be human. He spent most of his life in the capital, so he was well placed to write about the living conditions of the poor in London, and he does so with some vehemence in the poem. He specialised in religious imagery, but rejected that established religion, and he really, really felt that the church failed to help children in London who were forced to work. And if you look at writers like Dickens, they also felt that they made this social commentary. They wanted to explore this injustice through their writing. So Blake was influenced by the ideals of the Enlightenment, and Shelley and Byron in turn were influenced by Blake. London deals with libertarianism and rebellion against social control, and that libertarianism, as you will find out later, we try and make the links with the Romantics, and that was one of the key sort of aspects or ideals of the Romantic movement. So the poem deals with relationships. It talks about sanctity. Well, it talks about marriage, and it talks about the relationship between rich and poor, and possibly also you could say the people and the city. But it is a poem about power and the corruption of power, or how people suffer due to those in power. It talks about death. It talks about innocence, but what you get throughout this poem is a real sense of oppression and confinement, and the thudding rhythm of the poem reflects this. So structurally, we've got 4 regular quatrains and alternate lines rhyme, and I think that also the structure of the poem reflects that sense of confinement, reflects that sense of oppression. And I think the most striking structural feature in this poem is repetition. It emphasises the inability to escape those all-encompassing mind-forged manacles, those chains, those bonds that are forged in the mind. Blake frequently uses alliteration to link the concepts he's talking about. The weak are in woe, the mind is manacled, and the chimney is equated with that blackening church which appalls him. Maybe on a literal level, the pollution of London has sort of got to that church, but on a metaphorical level, it's blackened, it's corrupted, and that was, you know, what Blake felt about them ignoring the plight of the poor, and particularly children who were forced to work. So he explicitly mentions chimney sweep. The soldier isn't proudly standing there, he sighs almost in defeat. So it has a very sort of sombre mood, this poem does. Blake feels very, very strongly about what he says in the poem. So we've got lots of plosive alliteration to emphasise his feelings. Palace, plagues, blood, blasts, blights. And again, the better candidates will select words from the poem and deal with them in talking about the poet's intent, the poet's perspective. So we've got structural repetition also evident in the language of London. Chartered, mark, every are repeated in the poem. He talks about the Thames being chartered. If you charter something, it's mapped out. So it's almost like the city itself is mapped, and a river is free flowing. And obviously, you know, in nature, it's very, very free, but in London, it's chartered. It almost adds to that sense of confinement. So does the marks of weakness, the marks of woe. So they're repeated throughout the poem, and they create this sense of urgency, this sense that this is not right. Alliteration of the letter W is used as well, and the word every, in line 4, and the word every is repeated to suggest the sadness. And there's a real sense of pathos in this poem. The key image that you should remember in the exam is mind-forged manacles. The people of London are walking around woeful, sighing, crying, cursing, oppressed. And Blake goes on to explore how he sees that in London in the rest of the poem. So there's obviously some links in London. It links to living space because it gives us a very, very clear sense of place. And in living space, obviously a completely different place, a completely different century, but darker, whilst managing to sort of explore the confinement of these tiny, tiny places, these slums that have blossomed. She also, there's a celebratory sense to this poem. There's a you know, with the image of the egg, and there's something so fragile can be perched there, that these people are resilient people. So it's a good point of contrast. Obviously, with the soldier as well, you get a sense of place. The England that Brooke sees is a very different one to the one that Blake sees. Brooke uses religious imagery, blessed by sons of home, washed by rivers, a richer dust concealed. So England is a Middle England, and the Shires are a very, very different place than the centre of London for the poor. And then we get that sense of oppression and confinement also as imperceptibly as grief. The next poem we're going to look at is Ted Hughes's Hawk Roosting.